My name is Megan Ellis. I was 28 years old, and somewhere between the seared scallops and the chocolate torte at my little brother Cameron's rehearsal dinner in downtown Indianapolis, my parents uninvited me from his wedding at their restaurant. We sat at a long table in the private dining room at Riverlight, the kind of place people saved up for with floor-to-ceiling windows over the canal and candles flickering off the exposed brick. My older sister Danielle sat near the head of the table beside my mom laughing about a courtroom story, while Cameron and his fiancée Savannah glowed under the warm lights. My dad lifted his phone, typed something, and a second later, my screen lit up under the table. After talking with your mother and Danielle, we think it's best if you skip Cameron and Savannah's wedding tomorrow. This is our family's restaurant now, and your presence would make everyone uncomfortable. Please respect our wishes as paying clients. Across from me, my mom gave me that small, polished smile she used on servers who brought the wrong wine, then turned back to Danielle, as if they had just moved my chair, not exiled their younger daughter from her brother's wedding. If you're listening, and your parents have ever dropped a life-changing sentence on you over dinner, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you would have done in my place. Would you have blown up at the table, walked out, or sat still, the way I did, holding a phone that quietly erased you from a day you had helped make possible? Because that text left out one detail my parents didn't understand. Riverlight was not our family's restaurant in any way they imagined. It was the flagship of Heartline Hospitality, a 15-location restaurant group headquartered 3 floors above that dining room, and I was the founder and CEO. The menu my parents bragged about, the staff they nitpicked, the wine list my dad had just insulted, all of it existed because I had spent years building something they dismissed as restaurant work. I grew up in a suburb north of Indianapolis where lawns were perfect and conversations revolved around colleges and careers. My dad Thomas was a tax attorney, my mom Cheryl lived for charity boards and fundraisers, and in our house the only respectable paths were law, medicine, or serious finance. Danielle, 3 years older, followed the script perfectly: pre-law mock trial, law school, the first lawyer in the family. Cameron, 7 years younger than me, was the surprise youngest, doted on and forgiven for everything. I was the younger daughter in the middle, good enough in school, but constantly reminded not to waste my potential. The problem was, I fell in love with restaurants. On the rare nights we went somewhere nice downtown, my parents watched for people to impress while I watched the staff. I studied how hosts shuffled reservations, how servers read a table's mood, how a room went from chaos to contentment by last call. I kept menus in a shoebox under my bed and scribbled notes about lighting, table spacing, and why some dining rooms felt warm and others felt stiff. When I mentioned hospitality in high school, my mom called it a cute interest, and my dad said, "You're too smart to spend your life waiting tables. Those people work for clients like us." My grades and activities looked just like Danielle's had, and everyone assumed I would follow the same path. Indiana University, maybe law school, maybe an MBA. Secretly, I researched hospitality programs and called admissions offices from the guidance counselor's phone, pretending it was for a project. I applied to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas on a school computer, heart pounding as I typed in my credit card for the fee. When the acceptance letter came, a thick envelope with a shiny crest, I opened it in the driveway and knew immediately that if I showed it to my parents, something in our family would crack. That night after dinner, I laid the letter on the counter. "I got into UNLV's hospitality management program," I said. My mom's smile froze. My dad read the first paragraph and set the paper down like it was a parking ticket. "This is not what we discussed," he said. "We are not paying for you to go to some hospitality school in the desert so you can serve pancakes. If you want to chase this fantasy, you can pay for it yourself." My mom folded the letter back into its envelope. "Think about your future, Meg," she said. "Danielle is making real sacrifices. I was 17, the younger sister, and they were perfectly willing to cut me loose because my dream didn't match the picture they wanted to present to the world. So I left anyway. I took out loans, grabbed every work-study shift UNLV offered, and worked 2 part-time jobs hosting at an off-strip steakhouse and tutoring richer students in English and writing. Days were lectures on menu design and cost control. Nights were hours at a host stand, juggling walk-ins and reservation lists. On weekends, I worked banquets, learning how to flip a room in 40 minutes. Phone calls home stayed short and polite. My parents knew I was still doing that hospitality thing and had endless detailed questions for Danielle about law. When I graduated with honors, they sent flowers with a generic card and flew to Chicago to sit front row at Danielle's law school graduation instead. I saw them on social media smiling and proud in her photos, while I sat on my dorm bed in a wrinkled gown, my diploma still in my hands. That was the night I promised myself they would never again be able to pretend I hadn't accomplished anything. My first job was in Chicago at a busy farm-to-table restaurant that landed on every best new list. I started as a host and loved it immediately, the choreography of the floor, the way a dozen moving parts came together when service went right. 6 months in, on a slammed Saturday, a couple began tearing into a new server because their entrees were delayed. I stepped in, comped a course, reorganized the ticket order with the kitchen, and walked them calmly through the rest of the meal until they left happy instead of furious. I thought it was just another crisis. I didn't realize our regional director, Diane Matthews, was watching from the bar. After the rush, she came to the host stand. "You kept this place from falling apart tonight," she said. "You're thinking like a manager, not just a host. What's your name?" That conversation turned into mentorship invitations to managers' meetings and eventually, a promotion track. When a sister restaurant in St. Louis started losing money and staff, Diane pitched me to the company's CEO, Victor, as the assistant manager who could help fix it. "This could make or break your future," she warned. "The team is stubborn and the neighborhood is tricky." I said yes. In St. Louis, I worked the floor, the office, and sometimes the dish pit. We tightened the menu, refreshed the space on a shoestring budget, and retrained the staff to match the people who actually lived in the neighborhood. Within 9 months, sales were up, reviews improved, and Victor flew in to shake my hand and put me on a leadership development track. I went home for Thanksgiving proud and a little hopeful. Over turkey, I told my parents about St. Louis. My dad nodded. "Restaurant management is fine for now," he said, "but you can't build a serious future bussing tables and babysitting waitstaff. You're almost 30. When are you going to get serious?" Danielle launched into a story about a case she was second-chairing. My mom leaned in, and I realized nothing I said would ever register the way her stories did. Instead of trying to impress them, I focused on building something of my own. I kept a locked folder on my laptop full of spreadsheets and notes for a concept I called Heartline Hospitality, a small group of neighborhood restaurants in Midwestern cities, each with its own character, but the same core, honest food, warm service staff treated like people instead of disposable labor. When I showed the plan to Diane over coffee, she read every page and then introduced me to a few investors she trusted. I pitched them on buying a faded breakfast and lunch spot near Fountain Square in Indianapolis. They offered funding that scared me, but I signed anyway. I quit my corporate job, moved back to Indianapolis into a cramped apartment, and started rebuilding that old diner into ember and grain. The first year was brutal. By day, I dealt with contractors and inspections. By night, I tested recipes with the cooks and wrote training manuals. I obsessed over everything: how the chairs felt, how the light hit the tables in the morning, how long guests waited for coffee. When we reopened, we got a small local write-up and a lot of skeptical looks from neighbors. Within months, though, lines snaked down the sidewalk on weekends and regulars knew my staff by name. With that proof, the investors backed a second location, then a third, when my former company sold a cluster of underperforming urban restaurants in the Midwest. I pulled every connection I had and bought a handful of them. Over a few years, Heartline grew to 15 locations in Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Louisville. Riverlight, our canal front restaurant with the big windows and event space, became our flagship. I personally approved the paint colors, the menu, and the service standards there. Industry press started calling me a rising star. My parents somehow still called me our other daughter, Megan. She helps manage some restaurants. They did use Heartline when it benefited them. If my mom wanted to impress someone with brunch at Ember and Grain, she'd text Honey, "Do you know anyone there who can squeeze us in like I was still a host?" I'd quietly arrange a table and a complimentary dessert, and later she'd brag to her friends about our connections. They threw a lavish party when Danielle made partner at her firm. I found out from photos, not an invitation. When I asked why I hadn't been there, my mom said, "Oh, honey, it was mostly work people. You wouldn't have been comfortable." I was always close enough to be useful, never close enough to be central. I was still the younger sister who didn't quite fit. Cameron's engagement felt different. He called me himself, voice hoarse with excitement, to say he'd proposed to Savannah, a nurse he'd been dating since college. "We're thinking next spring," he said, "and I want you there no matter what Mom and Dad say." A few days later, he texted, "Mom is obsessed with this new place on the Canal Riverlight. She keeps saying it's basically our restaurant now because of some deal. Isn't that one of your places, lol?" I stared at the message in my office, Heartline's logo on the wall behind me. It would have been easy to say, "It's mine," and watch the expressions on my parents' faces. Instead, when the Ellis Blake wedding inquiry appeared in our booking system, I called Riverlight's general manager, Shane. "Those are my parents," I told him. "That's my brother. They don't know I own the company. For now, I want it to stay that way." Over the next few months, I watched from a distance as my parents toured Riverlight with our events coordinator, Tessa. My mom critiqued the art I'd chosen. "A little too modern," she said. "Weddings should feel timeless." My dad ran his hand over the tables and immediately pushed for upgrades. "Given our guest count and connections, we'll expect some extras," he told Tessa. She emailed me every time they asked for something beyond the contract. For Cameron's sake, I approved more than I should have: late-night snacks, off-menu specialty bourbons, upgraded linens, all without my parents knowing who had signed off. Cameron texted apologies for their behavior. Savannah pulled me aside once and said, "Thank you for whatever you're doing with the restaurant. I know they're a lot." I told her I just wanted their day to be beautiful, and I meant it, even as that old ache of being invisible to my own parents flared again. The rehearsal dinner should have been the easy part. Riverlight's private dining room glowed. The canal lights shimmered outside. I changed out of my blazer into a simple navy dress and slid into my seat halfway down the table. Savannah's dad gave a sweet toast. Cameron thanked my parents for making this night possible at our favorite restaurant, and my name never came up. The food came out flawlessly. Then my dad snapped his fingers at Dylan, our young sommelier. "This Cabernet is too warm," he said loudly. "Do you people not know how to store wine? For what we're paying, I expect competence." Dylan apologized and offered to bring a chilled bottle. My dad rolled his eyes. "Get the manager. I want to speak to whoever owns this place. The staff clearly needs better training." Before Shane could get there, I stood. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "This doesn't concern you, Megan," my dad said. "Just because you work at some restaurant company doesn't mean you understand fine dining. I want the owner." I convinced him to let Dylan replace the wine without making a bigger scene, then slipped into the service hallway and told Shane to bring up a couple of special bottles from our reserve. With our compliments, no mention of me. For the rest of the meal, I smiled and pretended everything was normal. When dessert plates were cleared, my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw my dad's name. "After some discussion, your mother and Danielle and I feel it's best if you don't attend the ceremony or reception tomorrow," the text read. "There has been ongoing tension around your career and choices, and we don't want anything overshadowing Cameron and Savannah's day at our restaurant. We are the paying clients and expect you to respect that. Please don't argue." I read it twice, feeling something inside me finally stop trying. When I looked up, my mom was already watching. She gave me an apologetic little shrug, the same expression she used when she sent food back. Danielle kept her eyes on her purse. Cameron at the far end laughed at a joke he hadn't realized would be the last one I heard in person. I set my napkin on the table, stood without making a scene, and walked out. I took the service elevator up to my office, sat down under the Heartline logo, and let the anger settle into clarity. First, I called our membership director and had every Heartline Circle perk attached to my parents' names, removed no more automatic upgrades, no more special notes, no more quiet favors. They would be regular guests from that moment on. Then I emailed Shane and Tessa. Cameron and Savannah's wedding goes exactly as planned, I wrote. Protect them from drama. My parents get only what is in the contract, nothing extra. Finally, I texted Cameron. Mom and Dad just told me they don't want me at the wedding, I wrote. I'm not going to fight on your weekend. I love you. I hope tomorrow is perfect. His replies, wait, what? And we'll talk later, came quickly. I set my phone face down and left it there. The next day, I came in through the back like I did for big events, checked in with the kitchen, and then retreated to my office. On the security monitors, I watched Cameron and Savannah say their vows with the canal behind them. He looked happy, but I saw him glance toward the back once, like he still expected me to appear. My parents moved through the room as if they owned it, shaking hands, accepting compliments. When the DJ announced the first dance, I muted the feed and read emails instead. At midnight, as the reception wound down, my dad called the host stand to ask why his membership hadn't comped a late-night snack. The host, with perfect calm, told him he did not have any active perks, but that we would be glad to welcome him like any other guest. Do you know who I am? He demanded. Yes, sir, the host said. You're Thomas Ellis. It was petty and small, compared to the hurt of missing my brother's wedding, but it was the first time anyone at Heartline had treated my parents the way they treated everybody else. In the weeks after I threw myself into work, I oversaw a menu change, negotiated new supplier contracts, visited multiple locations, and told everyone I was too busy to think about the wedding. My executive team worried quietly. Diane finally stopped being polite about it. She showed up at my condo one Sunday with coffee and pastries and found me surrounded by spreadsheets. You built an empire out of stubbornness, she said. But your father banned you from your own restaurant and your brother's wedding in one text. You don't get extra points for pretending that didn't hurt. I broke down in a way I hadn't let myself in years. Diane didn't lecture me. She just sat there and then insisted I talk to someone who wasn't on my payroll. She sent me to a therapist, Dr. Meredith Cole, who specialized in family trauma and chronically overworking entrepreneurs. In our first session, I listed my accomplishments: 15 restaurants, hundreds of employees' awards. When I finished, she asked, when your father texted you that you weren't welcome, how old did you feel I thought of my 17-year-old self with the UNLV letter on the counter? 17, I said. Over time, she helped me see how much of Heartline had been built as proof. I kept trying to become so obviously successful that my parents would have to respect me. You built armor, she said once. Now you're realizing armor doesn't heal wounds. While I worked on myself, my parents dealt with the consequences of their own choices. A guest's teenager posted a video of my dad yelling at Dylan. People online found his name and his law firm. A former client who had been unhappy with his billing filed a complaint with the bar mentioning a pattern of arrogance. An investigation followed. His firm quietly pushed him out. My mom lost a couple of board seats when donors whispered about that video. Their world shrank. I didn't lift a finger to help or hurt them. I just stayed out of it. Cameron and Savannah reached out when their daughter Lila was born, texting me photos and apologies and asking if we could talk. Part of me wanted to say yes and build some kind of separate relationship. Part of me knew that any connection with them kept a door open for my parents and Danielle to walk back into my life whenever they wanted something. In one session, Dr. Cole asked, "If a friend told you this story, what would you advise her to do?" I answered instantly. "I'd tell her to walk away, to stop giving people chances to hurt her." She nodded. "So why don't you deserve that too?" That question stayed with me. Eventually, I sent one last group text. I told Cameron and Savannah that I loved them and wished them and Lila a beautiful life, but that I needed distance to protect myself. I told my parents and Danielle that banning me from the wedding had been the last in a long line of choices that showed me exactly where I stood. I said I would no longer be in contact and asked them not to reach out. Then I blocked numbers, filtered emails, and told my staff to send any Ellis family requests to our legal department. Cutting them off wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and steady. Grief hit me at random moments when a dad helped his kid into a booster seat at one of my restaurants, when a family cheered for a birthday dessert, but it came with something else: relief. Without constantly trying to earn my family's approval, there was room for other things. Diane and I launched a mentorship and scholarship program for people in hospitality who didn't have family support. We helped line cooks become managers, servers go back to school, and young people avoid some of the loneliness I had known. I took actual days off. I reconnected with friends from college. I grew close to Grayson, the architect, designing a new Heartline concept, someone who understood what it meant to stop chasing people who never planned to meet you halfway. I still hear about my family, sometimes snippets about my parents moving into a smaller house, Danielle drowning in work, Cameron juggling teaching and a toddler, but I don't go looking. Their lives are the result of their choices the same way mine is the result of mine. Their punishment is not something I orchestrated. It's what happens when you treat people, including your own younger daughter, like props instead of like human beings. I don't forgive them. I don't send cards. I don't check their social media. I don't take their calls. I have built a life with my company, my friends, my partner, that doesn't revolve around chasing their approval. If you've ever been treated like the expendable child, the one who's only useful until you become inconvenient, hear me clearly: you are allowed to walk away. You don't have to keep auditioning for a role your parents never intended to give you. The sharpest revenge I ever took wasn't revoking memberships or watching careers crumble. It was learning that their opinion no longer decides my worth. Thank you for listening to my story. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if your parents tried to cut you out at dinner the way mine did, and whether you'd be willing to choose yourself even if it means leaving your family behind for good.